guys, welcome back. Today I have the wonderful Miss Courtney Weber with me, author, witch, how would you say, tarot reader?
Yeah, I'm a tarot reader. I usually call myself a tarot advisor, but it's the same old thing. So yeah, it's great to be with you today.
Thank you so much. And just so everyone knows, Courtney's in the apocalypse right now.
We are. West Coast United States apocalypse. There are fires. We're down, most of California's on fire, and it turns out Oregon and Washington are on fire too. So was just showing Joe the orange sky in my background. Yeah, I'm safe where I'm at, but I tried to take my dog out for a walk earlier. We had some very high winds and the smell of smoke, and he just crouched on the ground and was like, no, we're not going out in this. And I said, okay.
No.
You listen to the animals. And then there was one squirrel that was acting very strange. And it was kind of like tiptoeing across the street, which I've never seen a squirrel do before. They normally just run. And I'm like, the animals are acting weird. I think it's time to stay at home. So.
Yeah, absolutely. So thank you for being here today and doing this despite the apocalypse.
Yeah. We're all taking turns, right?
Yep. So I thought we'd start off chatting about some of the inspiration behind some of the books that you've created, because I know you've done the Morrigan one, which I have here, and there's the Brigid one before this.
Right.
And what's the next one?
I wrote one called Tarot for One on how to read for yourself. And I also have a book that's coming out in 2021 on Hecate. Don't have the specific release date yet, but keep an eye out for that one.
Yeah. So what inspires you to write the books about the specific goddess? Is that to do with your own personal connection to them? Or do you feel that it's a journey that sort of starts up and then sort of guides you to write about it? How does that look for you?
You know, it's a little of both. I have my whole work with witchcraft is about accessibility in witchcraft, and so I try to do that on as many levels, sometimes with more success than others. But most people that want to practice witchcraft are time poor, cash poor, or a little of the above. But yet, even then, you start to feel like there's a pull that's pulling you toward it, and there are. And I've been a deity focused witch most of my journey. I think that comes from having a pretty religious upbringing in both, Catholicism and American Southern Baptist influences, is about, God being the center of worship. And then that was an easy transition for me, is finding witchcraft that was polytheistic and having relationships with a number of different deities. And I've really feel that they have guided my life in some pretty profound ways, and different, in changing my life in ways that were pretty difficult at the time, but ultimately really blessed. And I've often found that calling exists for a lot of people out there, but sometimes it's very hard to find a middle ground. There's, up until I would say probably the last 5 years or so, there's really been a change in this tone. But up until about maybe 5 years ago, there was a real emphasis on just a personal inspiration being accepted as historical fact when it came to some of these deities, and also a lot of information on the internet, which was very convoluted and not very accurate. And it led to, I feel like, a very watered down, intangible experience for people, because yes, your experience is going to be the guiding force in your life, but when there is a 5,000 years of mythology and history, and in some cases tradition, you don't want to neglect that along the way, both for your own enrichment and also just out of respect for the places that these deities come from. But on the other hand, the pendulum swings a little too far, and there's a sense of almost a rigidity and sometimes orthodoxy to the way that gods are spoken about. And so, and I don't put that on the fault of the authors. I think that there are many authors that are simply reporting what the mythology that they found, but sometimes when I'm talking with people, there's a sense of, no, it can only be the way this author wrote that book. I'm like, I know that author, and they wouldn't agree with that. But there's a sense, so I don't want to put that onus on the authors as much as just, I think, a misunderstanding of what the role of the written word is meant to be. And I could go on a rabbit hole about how I think that's a leftover vestige of Christianity, especially here in the United States.
Mm.
And so what I've tried to do, and then I feel like sometimes people start to feel lost, like they want the good information, but perhaps that they don't find a lot of personal information or personal inspiration in strictly academic work,
Mm-hmm.
or they feel lost in it. And so there's a sense. So what I try to do is go to these academic sources as best I can, and then present it in a way that's accessible for the very busy witch who may be working 3 jobs and has 2 kids and but still wants to read. But at the end of the night, nobody's going to, after a day like that, is going to have a lot of brain power left to sit through and comb through academic text. So there's a way that I want to provide something that is true to these sources and true to the experts, but is also something that is written in a way that people can find their own path in it. And also in a way that's is gentle and accessible. And also reminding us that these gods are, as many people call, part of an ever-living tradition. They're still evolving, they're still growing. This doesn't mean that we're abandoning who they used to be, or we're creating things as they go along, but that how we are inspired by these myths and how we're inspired by these characters is going to change over the centuries, as it has with every major religion out there and their canon of texts. So I absolutely love mythology and folklore. That's my jam. One of my favorite things to do is try to make a guess as to what these stories why these were told or what they represented. And very often they can represent either a historical event that has been mythologized, or a set of circumstances that were very common to the original people that told the story. Just a brief example: when we in the United States, we often fear cornfields, and there's something out there that they're always haunted, that they're full of monsters. Like, don't go in a cornfield because it's scary. I know once I went to a pumpkin patch with a boyfriend at the time, and I said, I want to go out in that cornfield, and he was like, yeah, famous last words. Because he just is like, this is when you die, because that's just what happens in cornfields. And that's not true, right? We don't have like a statistics that murders are more likely to happen in cornfields than not. But when you're doing the research, and there was an author, and I'm suddenly dropping his name, and I'm very embarrassed, I can't recall who it was, said that in early farming cultures, or even just a couple of 100 years ago, the parents might warn their children about the old woman in the corn, or the ghost in the corn, or something to keep them from picking the cornflowers, because they're this brilliant blue and they're very beautiful, and so children might want to go collect them. And then they ruin the crop, and nobody has any food. So you have to put something in their head that's like, don't go out there. And a friend of mine from Puerto Rico said that there was often a lot of stories about monsters in the sugarcane fields for the same thing. That the kids might go out there and start eating the sugarcane, or they trample them and ruin a crop. So the parents would tell the stories about, like, well, the old witch in the sugarcane patch is going to get you. You go out there. Well, over the centuries, that's created a fear in us of these places. And I say, I'm the kind of witch that is like, I understand the origins of these spaces, and I also believe in the corn monsters and the sugarcane witches. I believe in both. I said, oh, those are out there. I know where they originated from, but it doesn't make them any less real at the end of the day.
That's really interesting. That's really cool. I was listening to that, and I was wondering whether or not there was going to be like a correlation between like sacrifices because of corn crops, like way back in history. Maybe that had colored in somewhere along the lines or not. So, which I can't possibly answer right now. I'm going to have to go look at.
Oh, I know. That's total Courtney bait. Like, oh, we could go into that. Yeah.
So if somebody is looking at, say, the Irish Pantheon, says you've done a book for Brigid and a book for Morrigan, some of that folklore and myth can be quite difficult to access just because of what's been lost to history and because of the sources that we do have. So what would you advise people who are perhaps new to these deities and are looking at that mythology for the first time, finding it probably a bit daunting, and not quite sure where to start with that? What would you advise for them?
Well, there are a lot of, that's one of the reasons why I write the books that I do is to provide some kind of an access point, a starting place to try to orient yourself within those. And then certainly go back and read the original translations of these, which many of them are available on the internet.
Hmm.
And, they can be very confusing. There's a lot of names. Sometimes the spellings are a little different. It's the same name, but it's spelled differently in a couple places. So it takes some patience. But, not only my book is a place to start, but also, I think, books by Morgan Daimler and Morpheus Ravenna, those are some great resources out there. There's also, if someone who is interested in Irish lore and mythology, definitely check out the Irish Pagan School, which is all taught by native Irish teachers. And so you certainly want to go back to your source and get oriented by people who are supporting this living tradition and who have lived it in their entire lives. So those are just a couple of access points and places where people can get in. What I would try to avoid is spending too much time in groups that are all about if it makes sense, that just say if it makes sense to you, guided by your intuition. I mean, you want some of that, you certainly do, but if you're finding yourself around people who just who answer every one of your questions with, well, how does it feel? How does it make sense to you? If that's the only answer you get, you're not really being guided very well. You do want to have your confirmations affirmed, and everybody's going to have a different relationship with deity, just like we have a different relationship with people. Right? There are some people that see me as a very dependable colleague and coworker, but I'm not necessarily the person they take their deepest secrets to. And I have some people that I don't work with for money, but that I would hope they feel that they can share anything with me. Well, you get those two people in a room, they're like, well, what's Courtney about? And one person says, she's not someone you take your secrets to, but she's someone that you work with. And the other person is like, I've never seen her work. I don't know what she's like that way, but I know that I can talk to her about anything like in these matters. And both of those things about me are true. So there is going to be some ways in which you have a certain relationship with a goddess that somebody else doesn't have. But if you're finding that people are creating correlations or creating things about them that aren't actually that really can't be supported by the lore, then maybe it's time to find some other people. But I think also it's just a matter of it's a lifelong journey. I wrote my book on Brigid 5 years ago, and even now if I could go back and look through the book, I'm like, well, I know why I was thinking that at the time. I don't know that I would necessarily think that way now.
Mm-hmm.
Because that's relationships change and grow, and allowing yourself to be in a space of confusion, but not feel like. I feel sometimes that there's a concern that people are standing there thinking that they're going to be doing it wrong and that the gods are going to come down and punish them for it.
Mm-hmm.
This is not Christianity, and when I say that in a very loose way, because I think that that's actually a pretty watered down, not accurate approach to Christianity, but that's the way a lot of people do approach that religion. And so but I think that gets carried over into paganism. I recently was talking with someone who felt that the Morrigan had called to them,
Mm-hmm.
and they weren't interested in working with the Morrigan at that time. And so they just said, yeah, I'm sorry, that's not for me. And later they felt horrendously guilty about it and thought that they owed this goddess an apology. And that what if the goddess never came back? And I was like, no, I don't know that you did anything wrong. Your life is your life. If it's not the right time, then so what? You haven't done anything wrong. If you desecrated a sacred site or you broke a vow that you made to this goddess, that's a different story. But if you're just like, yeah, no, thank you. You don't owe somebody an apology. You don't owe them an apology for that. And likely they'll come back around, So it's a different kind of relationship with deity when you're in paganism. One of the things I learned very early on with Brigid is that my good intentions weren't enough. I had to absolutely follow through on the things that I said, talking about, keeping your word. I talked about this in my Brigid book very early on, is that when I was in college, I made a pact with her that if she helped me with a college assignment, I'd write a book for her. And I really thought that she would just be like, that's nice, sweetie. And she'd help me anyway. And then, it would be fine. But, a lot of my endeavors were really borked after that. I could not get anything done. I couldn't get anything writing published. I couldn't move forward in my personal or career life. And I'd forgotten about my pledge. And then one day at a ritual, the message came to me that I owed her something that I made a promise a long time ago, and she wasn't going to let me go until I did it. And then it was, oh, okay. So then I started working on the book the next day. And since then, a lot of things opened up for me in my writing career. But I think that's where, but it's not like I feel that the gods stand there and judge of your character as you're a good person, you're a bad person. And if you're not good enough, then you're going to be cast out away from them. That's not how the pagan gods work. They understand that we are complicated beings that sometimes act like assholes. I forgot to ask, can I use spelled profanity in this?
Yeah, you're fine.
Okay, all right, I wasn't sure. And so I think that it's a matter, what I think they're looking for is people to keep their word and do what they say they're going to do. And if they have a bad day, they snap at their spouse. Yeah, it's good practice that you fix that, you remedy, you make good if you've hurt someone. And they will show you places in yourself that you need to improve. If you're making some big mistakes in relationships or in other parts of your life, they're going to show you. And it's not because you're bad and have to get fixed. It's because they want you at your best so that you can do your work. And it's a very different kind of understanding between them than I think a lot of us come from out of this. There's no room for shame, I think, is what I'm trying to say, shame and guilt. There is certainly room for owning your mistakes and trying to do better, but not like a condemnation of, that you were someone of us being inherently bad, or, screwing up and not making the offering right means that we're inherently unworthy. We might get a little kick in the butt saying do better next time, but it's not, a thing on our character. And that was way far away from the question you originally asked. I try to put that out there as much as possible, because I keep hearing the same things a lot from people. What if she rejects me? What if I do it wrong? Oh, she'll let you know if you need to do it differently. But you won't be punished for trying. You might just, oops, slip on a banana peel the next day and, ha ha ha, isn't that funny? Now try again.
I mean, I have a good example for the Morrigan, because I had some whiskey for the Morrigan that was giving her an offering, and she didn't like it. She wanted Irish whiskey. And I think I had grabbed this whiskey because I couldn't get Irish whiskey at the time. And the bottle cracked at the bottom and it went everywhere. So I had to deep wash the altar cloth, then getting the smell out. And I was like, okay, I will go to somewhere else. I will find Irish whiskey. And I just took that as being, it's almost like a sense of humor, almost like, yeah, no, I don't want that one. And you just go and do better. And I agree. I don't think the fear is helpful to anyone, other than people trying to control the conversation, maybe, that don't want other people to succeed. There may be some of that in certain places, but I feel that the gods, they probably see more of us than we see of ourselves. They probably have a much deeper understanding of who we are as individuals than even we do, because we get in our own way. And so I think fear-based responses to the gods is probably understandable, but not necessary.
Right.
Yeah. Because I can see where a lot of the fear would come from, even if you have not learned it from somewhere, even if, say, you've dodged the bullet of a patriarchal kind of indoctrination in your youth. Maybe you've dodged all of that, but you still come to this and it matters, and you know that it matters and it moves you, and you want to be a part of this great spiritual movement of your life, and it impacts on you and it feels sacred. And I can completely understand the human fear of making the mistake, but sometimes I think making the mistake is the point, because how else do we learn?
Yeah.
So,
and that's, I think, is the key there, is that it's about education, not punishment. If the gods, if you find yourself, because there was a few times where the gods, I feel like, picked me up by the scruff of my neck and slammed me down in place and say, you need to sit here and think about what you did. And it's not because I am being punished and need to atone. It's more about, I got to change the way of doing things so I can, be a better influence and support for people, and, try to work some stuff out. I mean, I feel a lot of ways that the gods have been preparing us for a long time to try to to try to work together, because we're in some scary times between the pandemic and a
Mm.
lot of other things I could go into, right? Little mini apocalypse is happening all over the world. And so there's the need to really need to work together and sometimes just tolerate each other's BS and make sure we've got our own in check.
Mm. Absolutely. That's an interesting thought. So how do you think that paganism can help to serve people as we go through the difficult times, and as people struggle, they may find themselves turning to paganism or witchcraft because it quite often goes hand in hand with feeling quite disenfranchised and trying to reclaim power back or sovereignty back. So if someone came to you and asked, or just, you know, so said, I'm feeling incredibly lost in these current times, and I'm feeling like I can't connect to my spiritual path, and I'm looking for advice on how to do that, what would you say to them?
So I'd first say that that's normal. Being lost is sometimes part of the experience. I know that for me, I was incredibly burned out on witchcraft a couple of years ago, and just even wasn't sure I was going to continue with it. Working with Morrigan helped me get back into it, but I had just focused for far too long on other people and not on myself. I don't say that to sound like a martyr or a champion. That was really the greatest form of being lazy, because it's actually a lot more fun to focus on the other people's shit than on your own. So, but then you do that, and after a time, there were times I was going to rituals and I wasn't feeling anything, and everybody around me was having I could see that the good work was being done. It wasn't the fault of the rituals, and other people around me were having powerful experiences, and I wasn't. And I wasn't having the prophetic dreams I'd had since I was a kid, and I wasn't feeling anything when I went to my altar. And so I think at that point it was time for a complete reboot. My reboot involved moving 3,000 miles away and packing up all my altar supplies and not looking at them for months. And so at first, there's a couple of ways to approach it. One, it may involve it's time to start from scratch and find a new path, maybe where you are as you've changed as a person, and the work you used to do is no longer supportive of that. I mean, I have clothes that I wore in my early 20s, and most of them still fit pretty much. But then there was one day I was pretty upset because I couldn't get back into one of the skirts that I used to wear a lot. But then I actually looked at it and said, "Would I actually even wear this today? This isn't me anymore." You know, this was a revenge skirt that I used to wear out at clubs when I was just broken up with someone. I've been married and for almost 5 years, and I've been with the same person for almost 11. There's nothing in this skirt for me anymore. I wouldn't feel good in it. I'd feel kind of, I don't know, it would feel weird. It's not me. And so it was time to say, it's, you know, it's not necessarily so necessary that you cry because the old path doesn't fit you anymore. Maybe it's time to expand and grow and move into something else. Alternatively, if you don't know what that is, it's worth it just to keep doing a routine until it makes sense again. Advice that sometimes rabbis can give one another. If somebody is burned out and saying, I've lost my way, I've lost faith, and I'm supposed to be a rabbi to my people, what do I do? And they say, keep doing it until you remember why you did it in the first place. You know, and so it's when, you know, part of how I came back into it was just going back and establishing a routine where, you know, first thing in the morning I go out and I pour water to the land spirits. I don't ask them for anything. I just pour water and say, I'm here, and, you know, I listen and I honor you. And then the next thing I do is then I go and make a cup of tea for Brigid. And Brigid and I were in a big fight not too long ago. I was not having anything to do with her. I was like, look, you and I are not in a good place. Your altar is not getting tended. Your candles are not getting lit. And I'm not even going to look at you when I walk by your altar. And then that's come back around. I don't necessarily, I'm still not at a place yet where I'm praying there every day, but it is going back to light the candles, make the offering, light the candles, make the offering. And then that's turned into having like weekly cleansings on myself. And it doesn't mean that I have to do a great giant ritual, but I've got a bottle of ocean water from an outgoing tide. That's the most powerful banishing energy you can get. I throw that in the bathtub. I don't have to think about, okay, what am I going to let go of? Are my chakras open? Am I getting the funk out? No, the ocean water is doing all the work. I just got to be there, you know, and then I start to feel like I'm back in tune with things. It was just like today, as I was telling you, we've got these wild winds and these very smoky clouds going on. And I really needed to, my dog and I normally take a stroll. I won't say the W word because he might hear me. We take a stroll every morning, kind of late morning. And something just didn't feel right. And I went outside and talked to the earth spirits. And I was like, I don't know. Am I being kind of nutty here? I don't really feel like it's all that safe to be out. And they said, well, go get the dog. I went, okay. So I got him and brought him out on the leash, and he just lay down on the ground and looked at me like, I'm not going anywhere. And I went, okay, that's the that's the message. It's time to go back inside and be safe.
Yeah.
And who knows, we could have been just fine on the walk, but there's no, oops, I said it, but I don't think he heard me. But there's, or he may not care to me. He's like, you know, we're not doing that today. We're just going to stay inside. We're staying inside.
The table. No.
No, away from the fiery hurricane winds. We're going to stay home. So, yeah, that's that.
What do you think one of the biggest messages that the Morrigan, or one of the biggest lessons that the Morrigan taught you was?
It's so funny. There's been so many of them, but I think the message of there's a message in freedom and being humble and recognizing your own limitations. Because I mean, there's a number of things that she and her sisters helped me with along the way. But there was a time when I was feeling an immense amount of guilt and shame, as we talked about, these being kind of useless emotions. Again, separate from holding accountability, recognizing when you've done wrong is a different thing than almost just feeling inherently like you've screwed up and you can't really pinpoint it. And I was in Ireland with my husband, and I went to Awutnagat, the Cave of the Cats. And I was able to go in by myself, which is, you know, it's unusual. It's better to take a guide. Circumstances allowed me to do it on my own, but definitely take a guide especially if you've not been there before. And I just sat in, and out here in Oregon, we're in earthquake country. So there's always that sense of, okay, is this the day the big one's going to happen? Am I going to get stuck? And, you know, that's not really what Ireland is known for, right? Earthquakes can happen everywhere, but that's not necessarily their thing. But here I am still in this cave 6 feet under. And that's that thought of, okay, what if it collapses while I'm inside? And then just recognizing how strong that stone is, the real bones of the earth, and how long it's been there. And the sense of feeling that I had for so long tried to essentially hold up the world. And that did nobody any good, least of all me. I wasn't helping other people, and I certainly wasn't helping myself. And there was a sense in the Morrigan said, did you really think you were so strong that you could hold the world? Do you know what kind of strength that actually takes? Because that's what's here in this cave, and you don't have that. And that's true. I don't have the strength to hold up the earth for 100 million years, which is about how old that cave is. She's like, no, you don't have this kind of strength, and it doesn't make sense for you to try. And that was so freeing, and there was just to be so humble in the limitations there, and just saying, you're right, I don't have that. And there's a lot of ego there. It's actually the same message Brigid gave me. She's like, are you so arrogant to think that you could be perfect? That's some arrogance. I'm like, oh, you know, did you really think you could be nice all the time? Nobody can. What makes you think that you're supposed to do that? Who the hell do you think you are? You know, it's interesting how the two messages came in these very different ways. A lot of people also assume Brigid being all sweetness and light, but to me, she's the one who says, who the hell do you think you are to think that you could be nice all the time? Nobody does that. You think that's possible, and that only you can do it? And I'm like, yeah, I was holding myself to a strange standard. She's like, that was an arrogant standard. No. And whereas the Morrigan, it was just more like, you need to look around you. It's just not possible.
Mm.
to hold up that much. And so that was, I think, was the most freeing message that the Morrigan gave me. But she's also been one that I think just being in the space, the Morrigan, because she's such a mixture of contradictions, of joy and of sorrow, and of, you don't always know when you read the myths, you're not always sure whose side she's on. Is she actually helping her people? Or is she raining on their parade, or is she cursing them? When you look at some of the things, especially in the Second Battle of Mochura, you don't really know. And so it's very, it's interesting. So I think the fact that there was this great paradox. I had two huge losses within about a month of each other. That happened right as I was trying to wrap up my Morrigan book. And both the losses brought with them, of course, a lot of grief. But there's a strange kind of joy that only comes in loss. Whether it's that you realize that there's a joy that you got to know someone and they're gone. But not everybody in the world got to know this person, but you did, and so there's a sense of, I knew them. For me, it was a very old friend who we'd had a really bad falling out many, many years before. And it just kind of, I kept them at a distance. We had mostly cooled off, but I refused to fully let them back into my life in a meaningful way, just because I'm like, I owed it to my younger self to stay angry or something. And then when we had just a few months before this person died, had finally laid everything out on the table as to what had happened, and just to say, I'm really, really fucking sorry that I talked to you that way. But here's where I was coming from. It was, whoa, I had no idea that that's what you saw and that's what you heard. And I can totally get why you were mad at me. And I'm so sorry that I reacted the way that I did. And so it was this incredibly freeing experience. But then they died. So I was, in one hand, I was furious that I lost them so soon after having them back fully in my life. But at the same time, was so happy that I had had the opportunity to make amends, because they could have just died, and that there would have been a lot of questions left unanswered, a lot of assumptions, and a lot of, desire for apology. And then, it was interesting. One night I went down to, after they'd passed away, and I was also dealing with a lot of anger at my younger self for cutting them out like that. And I had this incredibly beautiful experience. I went down to the lake, and it was a full moon. The Morrigan's not associated with the full moon, just putting that out there, but it was just a magical experience. But the Bive, one of the Morrigan sisters, has some appearances at lakes. And I went down to this lake at the full moon, and I just cried. And I had this moment where I swear my younger self was standing right in front of me. And there I was, just pleading with her, saying, you know what, let this go. Tell them you're sorry. You don't have much time with them. You're going to miss out. Just tell them you're sorry. You don't mean it. Tell them tell them where your perspective is, and they can clarify it for you. And what was so funny is my younger self answered back. She said, there was no way I could have done that. Do you remember the way he spoke to me? Do you remember what he had done leading up to that? Why in the world would I think, how could I have gone to them and, in any sort of way made amends right now? And it wasn't just about me. And there was just this piece that was like, you know what, you're right. It really was just a terrible set of circumstances that led it this way. And I don't know there was any way to do it differently. But we at least got back to where we started in the end. And so I was able to walk away with that. And I feel like the Morrigan I feel like provided the space for me to grieve in that complicated way. And then also gave me the space to kind of shapeshift the way that, she did, but it's like shapeshift back into my younger self and have a talk with her, and her being like, look, you've been really mad at me for a while because of what happened, and this guy died. But let me tell you, do you remember what he said? Do you really think I could have done anything about that? And I'm like, actually, no, you did the right thing to walk away. I did. Okay. So I feel like that's one of the great things that Morrigan offers us, is that space to be just to sit in a paradox, so we don't have to solve it. All right. I feel like in modern neo-paganism, especially people here in the United States, we're always trying to check boxes, put things in boxes, like, is she goddess of this? Is she goddess of that? Well, if I've got this paradox, is it this or is it that? It's like, sometimes it's all or neither and a little bit of everything. So just sit with that and go, I don't have to be in either joy or sadness. I can have both of them, and it doesn't make sense. And that's just where I'm at.
I love that about the Morrigan. I love that she almost creates the space to allow the complexity of the human condition, which could be seen as a reflection of her condition on a smaller scale, and allow that we are constantly shifting through our energy, and we're constantly shifting through our experiences. And I know that she said to me because I had been dealing with loss as well, it was towards the end of last year, and it was complicated, and it was one after another. And she had said to me, we are the memories that we carry with us. And so it's kind of like that memory doesn't have to be something which is choking you, which is weighing you down. It can be painful, but at the same time, you can honor the joyful part of it as well. And that kind of mirrors my experience with having lost family members, and the grieving was very complicated, because how are you supposed to deal with it? Same sort of circumstances, but presumably slightly different. But it had that feeling of wanting to honor your ancestors, but at the same time feeling disconnected from them. And so it was finding a way of shifting through that within my own head, mostly, to get to a point where it's not so much that it's comfortable, but it kind of almost becomes integrated with you. It almost just becomes a part of you without it feeling like you're struggling to hold it. Does that make sense?
Yeah. No, it absolutely makes sense. Yeah, to me anyway.
Awesome. So we're about time.
Well, thanks for having me on. Let me just choo.
No, I love it. I love sitting here and learning things. So thank you so much for coming. And where can people find you if they're looking for you? I will put links down below, but if you just want to tell them as well.
Yeah. So my website is CourtneyAWeber.com. That's Weber with 1 B, not 2. I'm on all the social media platforms. I spend a lot of time on Twitter and Facebook, so it's easy to find me there. I am on Instagram. Most of my pictures are of my dog and my cats. So I get a lot of witches follow me, and that's great, y'all. But most of this is about pets. So, but it's certainly come on out in there. I have a podcast called That Witch Life, and we drop every Monday, and we're on all the major podcast platforms. And it's a lot about this, about like living as a witch in today's world. So I'm trying to provide as much accessible means as possible. So we do have a live recording coming up on Sunday, September 20th. I don't know if that's after this gets released.
Oh, yeah.
It is. Okay, never mind. So let that out. So anyway, thanks so much for having me on.
Yeah, it was lovely to talk to you. And like I said, guys, if you want to check out more, there will be links down below. If you have any comments, please let me know. And if there's anyone you would like me to interview, please let me know, or I will just keep going and knocking on doors like I have been for a few months now. So talk to you guys soon, and many blessings.